Okay, give that a second to load up. Today we're going to be looking at the Greco-Persian War, the very first one. Okay, this is the one that occurred at the main battles of Marathon. Before we get into that, I want you to remember Cyrus the Great. Okay, it was about 50 years, 60 years before um, this battle. Okay, Cyrus conquered Sardis, and the king of Lydia was a guy named Croesus. Now, Croesus, he was very wealthy, and we talked about him back then. And he's the guy that may have prayed to Apollo, and Apollo put the fire out when they're going to kill him by burning him alive. Now, while Cyrus was in Lydia, in Sardis, he had these ambassadors come in from Greece, and these were actually Spartans. And they told Cyrus to leave the Ionian cities alone. Now, Ionia are those cities on the Turkish coast. Okay, they're across the Aegean Sea from Greece. But these are the Greek colonies. And Cyrus, he was a little bit confused, like, why should I worry about this? But the Spartan said, if you don't leave them alone, you'll have to answer to Sparta. Okay. Now, the Spartans, the ambassadors, thought that the name Sparta would strike fear in the heart of Cyrus, and Cyrus had never heard of him before. In fact, he turned to one of the Ionian helpers he had there and said, who are these Spartans? Because he didn't know anything about them. And Cyrus didn't do anything with the Spartans back then, never went into Greece. He did conquer the Ionian cities over there, but he left them with their own governments, with a satrap over above them. And so they would basically have their own local government, but they just had to pay taxes to that national government. Now, years go on, okay? 48 years later, Aristagoras, he is the ruler of one of the Ionian cities, Miletus. And he starts to encourage the other Ionian rulers to throw off the Persian satraps, the overlords, and so they can reestablish their independence. He does this. And then Darius, okay, after Cyrus the Great, we had Cambyses, who ruled for a few years. Then you had Darius. Remember Darius? He's the one that fought against the Magi. But Darius, he's been in charge of the Persian Empire for about 31 years by this time. And he hears about the Ionians, and so he's going to come take care of them. In the meantime, Aristagoras sends for help from the Athenians. The Athenians come over to help Aristagoras. Their brothers fight the Persians or push the Persians back. And so this small army goes over to the city of Sardis. They burn the city down, and they have a revolution for about 4 or 5 years before Darius recaptures Miletus in about 494 BCE. Okay, and Aristagoras flees, and that brings an end to the golden age of the Ionian Greek cities. Okay, in fact, when Aristagoras fled, he left this one guy named Pythagoras in charge. Now, Pythagoras is a famous mathematician that we'll learn about later on. Maybe, well, you'll learn about him in math class for sure. I don't know if I have time for social studies right now, but after he reconquered Miletus, he plans an attack on Athens to pay them back for supporting the Ionian Greeks. Now, the Greco-Persian War, 490 BCE. Before we start, okay, the Persian army is led by Datis and Artaphernes, who is Darius's nephew. Now, they have about 90,000 soldiers. There's a bunch of guys, 2,000 cavalry. The Greek at this time don't have any cavalry. They just have the hoplites, right? But when you look at the soldiers, the infantrymen, the people that will do most of the fighting for the Persians, they're mostly armed with spears and swords, and they don't really have any armor. They may have a wicker shield. Now, wicker is straw. Okay, you may have sat in a wicker chair. Typically it's outdoor furniture, but it's a straw shield, and it's not really meant to hold back heavy weapons. Okay, now the Greeks, they're led by this guy named Miltiades. Miltiades, his army may be as strong as 20,000, but it's probably closer to just over 10,000 hoplites. Okay, so you have a very big disparity of numbers between the two. Now, when we look at this map, we want to look at the green line. Okay, the green line is the first invasion. So this green line comes up. They stop off at one of the islands, they come across, they conquer a few of these cities, and then they come down into Marathon right there. Athens is down here, and it's across this Attica Peninsula where Marathon is. And so we have the Persians are going to march over and attack Athens from behind. And that's their plan in 490 BCE. Now, Miltiades, he takes the troops over and he sets them up to prevent them from coming over the hill. In the meantime, they get this runner. Now, this is really one of the guys I wanted to get focused on a little bit. His name is Pheidippides. And Pheidippides runs to Sparta to ask Sparta for help. And the run is about 250 kilometers, about 150 miles. And it goes over about a 3,000 foot elevation change. So if you can imagine running from Seattle all the way up and over the Cascade Mountains, over Cascade Pass, or over Snoqualmie Pass, Cascades. The Snoqualmie Pass is at 3,022 feet, which is about the same height as the elevation that Pheidippides would run over. And then drop back down, run all the way across Clallam, Ellensburg, all the way to across even the Columbia River, and all the way to about Royal City, about halfway between here and Seattle. That's how far Pheidippides ran in 2 days. Now, when he got to Sparta, the Spartans said, hey, we cannot come help. We are in the middle of this festival. Okay, the Spartans were very religious, and so they said, nope, we can't do it. And the Spartans may have also faced off against their helots for a bit too, because there may have been another helot revolt. The Messenians may have revolted at that time. And so the Spartans had their hands full. They couldn't come help. Okay, so Pheidippides runs back to Athens, 250 miles. Then he runs over the mountain, over the peninsula to Marathon to fight in the battle. Okay. Now, the battle. What happens is when the Persians land, they're 90,000 soldiers. They have this nice plain, this beach they land on. The Spartans, I mean, not the Spartans, but the Athenians are back in this valley where they are preventing so the Athenians are in this valley, and they're going to prevent the Persians from marching through and up and over the peninsula to attack Athens. Okay, there's no other way through. So the Persians can't march up and over the mountains, or there's no other road to Athens from Marathon. And so they have the Persians bottled up, and they sit there for several days waiting for one side to make the move. Eventually, the Persians begin to retreat. Okay, they change their battle plan. They begin to load their soldiers back onto their boats because they're going to sail around the Attica Peninsula and attack Athens from Phaleron. It is the port city, about 5 or 6 miles away from Athens, because Athens is in the mountainside a little bit. So they're going to take the boats back around the peninsula and attack Athens from its major port. Now, when they load up their cavalry, okay, the cavalry is loaded first. And so the Athenians, they see this and they start to engage, because when you have an amphibious means, land and water, both. When you have an amphibious landing of soldiers, okay, when you look at World War II, D-Day is this way, but amphibious landings are very dangerous because you're moving from water to land or land to water, and it's not a very good fighting area. And so the Athenians see this and they charge. The cavalry is taken out of the battle because they are already on the boats, and the Persians aren't quite ready. Now, as they start to charge, they actually march up a little ways. They're separated by about 1,500 meters, about a mile. And they march up, they get within a quarter mile or 400 meters, and they sprint the last 400 meters. And they hit the Persian soldiers, the ones with wicker shields, spears, and a short sword. And the hoplites are armed with that. And we looked at the hoplites the other day, but they have their armor, they have their shields, and they have their helmets. And so they have some fairly good protection. Now, they have the battle. The Persians are still trying to retreat onto their ships. Eventually, they get onto their ships. It's a very nasty, bloody battle. About 7,000, 6 to 7,000 Persians are killed, and they only lose about 190 Athenians. But the Persians get on the boats and they sail around. And so the Athenians, they have to march. They have to go from Marathon all the way back over to Athens. And they run 80 pounds or 40 pounds worth of armor. They run all the way up and over the top of the hill, about 30 miles back to the city. And so when the next morning, when the Persian fleet comes up to attack and to get out at Phaleron, the Athenian army is already there. And so the Persians just give up and sail home. So there we have the Athenians. Looked like it's from one of the games out there, but that would be typically what they have and what they look like. The Athenians might be a little closer together. Okay, now here is the assignment. What are the 3 most important parts of this presentation? Okay, talked about Cyrus. We talked about the Ionian Revolt. We talked about the Greek Golden Age a little bit. We talked about Darius sending 90,000 troops over. We talked about the Battle of Marathon. We talked about the endurance of Phidippides, not only just of Phidippides, but of all the Greek soldiers. So what's the most important thing out there? And why do you think it's most important? Give me a sentence on those. And we'll talk to you guys later. Send me an email if you have any questions.